The sun hung low over Waset, its golden rays piercing through the dust like judgment. The market stalls were beginning to empty, but one man still stood tall amid the silence. Nekau, a noble from a long feuding lineage. Across from him, cloaked in blue linen and disdain, was Horemheb, chieftain of a desert tribe who had lost a son to Nekau's blade. The feud had festered for 3 generations. Now, finally, the blood debt was to be settled, not with silver, not with cattle, but with a girl. 17-year-old Layali knelt at her father's side, wrists bound with papyrus rope, her face emotionless but her heart loud with fear. "She's untouched," her father declared, as if Layali were a vessel, not a soul. "She'll bear you strong children. May the past be buried." Horemheb's hawk-like eyes scanned her, not with lust, but with strategy. She was leverage, not love. The old man nodded once. It was done. The pact was sealed. Her brother had killed a tribesman in a drunken brawl. Now her body would repay the debt. Layali didn't cry as they pulled her away. She stared ahead, swallowing rage like salt water. The guards placed her on a mule, its sides marked with the tribe's black sun symbol. As the city walls faded behind her, Layali wondered if the gods had abandoned her or if they were merely watching in silence. Her mother didn't come to say goodbye. Her father didn't touch her hand. She was just a name traded in a war of pride. And yet, far across the dunes, a man she'd never met, scarred by war, hardened by exile, was waiting, not for a wife, not for peace, but for something he no longer believed he deserved: redemption. The journey stretched across 2 days and nights, the desert swallowing all signs of civilization behind her. Layali's wrists remained loosely tied, not to restrain her, but to remind her that she was no longer free. Sand whipped her face with every gust of wind, and the black sun emblem on the mule's harness seemed to mock her with each jolt. The men escorting her rarely spoke. When they did, their dialect was thick, clipped, tribal, nothing like the flowing speech of Waset. On the 3rd dawn, they crested a hill and halted. Below, nestled between stone outcrops and tamarisk trees, was the tribe's camp. Tents of camel hide flapped lazily in the breeze, and small children peeked out, eyes wide at the sight of the new girl. Layali sat tall, unwilling to cower. As she dismounted, the chieftain's tent opened. Out stepped a man she had not expected. Young, perhaps 5 or 6 years older than her, but already wearing the sun-creased face of a warrior. His left arm was bandaged, his stance favoring one side. He looked like someone who had fought too many battles and cared for too few people. This wasn't Horemheb. This was his son. "Your name?" he asked, voice low and guarded. "Layali," she replied evenly. "I was not told you'd be my husband." A pause. "You were not told wrong," he said. "You belong to the tribe now, but not to me." Her heart skipped, unsure if she'd been insulted or spared. He turned and walked away, leaving her alone at the center of staring eyes and whispered judgments. An elder woman took her arm and led her into a small side tent. No ceremony, no welcome, no warmth. Layali sat on the woven mat and whispered to herself, "Then I will belong to no one, and nothing." The fire in her had just begun. The camp bustled with rhythm and order. Children fetched water, women ground barley, men sharpened blades or repaired saddles. Layali watched it all from the threshold of her small tent, unnoticed, unspoken to, yet constantly observed. Her presence was a disruption, a debt with skin and breath. She was not beaten nor mistreated, but that didn't mean she was welcome. The warrior, his name was Menmaatre, avoided her entirely. Each day he passed her without a glance, his stride limping but determined, his silence louder than words. He trained with the others, gave orders, sat by the fire, but never near her. He did not sleep in her tent. He did not offer explanations, and she was not foolish enough to beg for them. At night, she listened to the crackling flames and the murmurs of the tribe. Some called her cursed. Others said she was a peace token doomed to be forgotten once the feud faded from memory. Still, Layali stayed silent. She mended garments for the old women, helped feed the goats, kept her head high. One afternoon, as she reached for a bowl, she flinched at the sudden sound of shouting. Menmaatre was arguing with his father, words sharp, gestures sharper. She couldn't understand all of it, but one thing was clear. Her name had been spoken. Later that night, Menmaatre approached her tent. She stood when he entered. He looked exhausted, sweat still clinging to his brow. "I didn't ask for you," he said finally, "but I won't see you shamed." "I didn't ask for this either," she replied. He studied her for a moment, as if seeing something he hadn't expected. Resilience, or perhaps defiance. Then he turned and left again. No promises, no kindness. But for the first time, Layali felt something shift. He hadn't looked at her like property. He had looked at her like a storm. Days turned into weeks, and though the heat scorched their skin, it was pride that truly burned them both. Layali learned quickly how to ride a desert pony without falling, how to cook with unfamiliar spices, how to read the moods of a people who never said what they truly meant. She smiled when she had to, bowed when expected, and inside she fed the fire that kept her spirit alive. Menmaatre, meanwhile, bled quietly. The wound in his arm had reopened, and though he wrapped it tightly, the stiffness in his movements betrayed the pain. She noticed. He knew she noticed. But neither said anything. They circled each other like wary animals, two alike in their stubbornness to take the first step. One evening, as the red sun dipped low, Layali approached the well with an empty jar. There she found Menmaatre, alone, his bandage soaked and his hand trembling. "You're bleeding," she said flatly. "I've bled before," he muttered. She stepped closer. "You'll lose the arm if you don't clean it properly." "Then let it rot," he snapped, but the edge in his voice cracked. She didn't flinch. Instead, she reached for his arm. He didn't stop her. She knelt, unwrapped the dirty linen, and began washing the wound with a cloth from her own robe. He watched her, his jaw tight, his eyes unreadable. "Why help me?" he asked. "Because I don't want to owe you my life for saving yours," she said, voice like iron dipped in honey. For the first time, he almost smiled. Almost. That night they sat by the fire, still apart, still silent. But something had changed. The tribe noticed. Whispers spread. The girl with rope-burned wrists had not broken, and the warrior who wanted nothing had begun to watch her, not as an offering, but as a flame. The tribe's peace was as fragile as cracked pottery. One wrong gesture, one careless word, and it would shatter. The blood feud had not truly ended. It had merely been paused. Many in the tribe still resented Layali's presence, whispering that she was a spy, a curse sent to lure them into ruin. And when two of the tribe's goats were found slaughtered near the riverbed, it was her name that fell first from suspicious lips. Menmaatre stood before the council fire that night, surrounded by elders and warriors, the scent of smoke thick in the air. Layali stood beside him, her chin high despite the eyes piercing her like spears. "She has done nothing," Menmaatre said, voice steady. "I saw her with a herd hours before the attack. She returned alone and left no tracks behind her." One elder grunted. "Then who would strike so close to our tents?" Another muttered. "She carries the blood of our enemies." Menmaatre didn't flinch. "Then blame me for keeping her here. But do not accuse a girl with no sword, no kin, and no voice in this camp. That is not justice." Layali didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her silence had become her blade. "If the water clouds, the spirits, name you guilty. If it stays clear, you may stay." Layali looked to Menmaatre once. He gave a single nod. Then she sliced her palm. Blood dripped into the bowl. The camp held its breath. The water shimmered, but stayed clear. A sigh rippled through the crowd. That night, the fire burned brighter than ever. Since the trial, something had changed. Not just in the tribe, but between Layali and Menmaatre. The camp gave her more space, fewer stares, and even the children stopped calling her Desert Ghost behind her back. Menmaatre, too, had changed. He began speaking to her. Not often, not gently, but enough to shift the air between them. He taught her how to bind wounds with crushed reeds and wild herbs, how to whistle to the camels so they came without fear. He corrected her grip on the spear with a touch that lingered half a heartbeat too long, and she, in turn, watched the way his eyes searched the horizon each morning, how he never slept more than a few hours, how he pressed his hand to his side when no one looked. They were both broken people trying not to fall apart again. One night, a desert storm hit without warning. Tents buckled, fires blew out, and the wind howled like ancient curses. Layali's tent collapsed. She crawled into the nearest shelter, his. He was already inside, sharpening a blade by candlelight. He looked up, startled, but said nothing. She sat across from him, soaked in dust, hair wild, eyes burning. The storm outside shrieked, but inside was silence thick as honey. "Do you want me to leave?" she asked. He didn't answer. He set the blade down and reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "No," he said quietly. "You've already stayed longer than anyone else ever has." That night, they didn't touch. But they didn't sleep apart either. They lay back to back, the heat between them more dangerous than the fire outside. When the morning sun rose and the storm faded, Layali stepped out into the light no longer just a traded girl, and Menmaatre watched her like a man afraid to hope. Peace is always brief in the desert. Just when Layali began to feel the earth beneath her feet again, the past returned like a dagger drawn in darkness. A scout came riding hard into the camp one dusk, dust caked on his lips, eyes wide with warning. "Men from Wasset," he gasped. "Armed, close, 5 riders. One wears the falcon ring of Nekau." Layali's blood turned cold. Her father, or his men. She didn't ask why they were coming. She knew. He had traded her like livestock, but pride was a disease. Perhaps he now regretted what had been given, or feared that the feud had not truly ended. Menmaatre stood tall before the fire, his warriors gathering. "We do not seek war," he told them, "but if they bring blades to our tents, they will leave with scars." Layali stepped forward. "Let me speak to them." Gasps, protests. Even Menmaatre looked stunned. "They seek to shame you," he said, "to reclaim what they threw away." "Then let them see I am no longer theirs to command," she said. "Let them see who I became without them." When the Wasset riders arrived, they expected a meek girl wrapped in shame. Instead, they saw a desert-blooded woman, standing tall beside a scarred warrior. "Layali," one called, "your father commands you return. You've brought dishonor to your house." She took a step forward. "My father no longer speaks for me, and if he dares step foot on this sand, I will remind him of the daughter he sold for silence." The riders hesitated. One reached for his sword. Menmaatre raised his spear, tension like lightning, but the leader spat on the ground, turned, and rode off. That night, Layali didn't ask to sleep in Menmatre's tent. She walked in like it had always been her home. The stars over the desert stretched endlessly that night, silver flames burning through the silence. Inside Menmatre's tent, the air was heavier than sand, thick with what hadn't yet been spoken. Layali sat near the fire pit, her eyes on the flickering coals, her thoughts torn between what she had left behind and what she had become. Menmaatre watched her from the other side, arms crossed, shoulders tense. "You defied your father," he said finally, voice low. You could have gone back. They would have taken you. She didn't look at him. I wasn't theirs to take. I never was. Silence lingered again. Then he crossed the space between them and knelt. You've changed everything, he murmured. The tribe respects you. I respect you. His voice faltered, like it wasn't used to saying things that mattered. Layali turned to him, her face lit by firelight, soft yet fierce. You said I wasn't yours, that I didn't belong to you, she said. But I do. He looked at her, startled. Not as a possession, she added quickly, her voice trembling but clear. But as a choice, and I choose you. His hand rose slowly, touching her cheek like she might vanish. She didn't. She leaned in, closing the distance not just with her lips, but with everything she had held back since the day she'd been traded like a sack of grain. The kiss was not sweet. It was storm and surrender, pain and promise. When it broke, neither spoke. There was no need. Something sacred had passed between them, something not bound by blood feuds or bargains. That night, they did not sleep apart. And when the dawn came, Layali stood at the edge of the camp, the wind in her hair, the desert behind her, and a man beside her who had never been meant to love her, but did. Morning brought no peace. A scout rushed into camp just as the sun touched the dunes, breathless and bruised. The Wasit soldiers are coming, he warned. Not traitors, not kin, warriors. This time it wasn't about reclaiming Layali. It was about revenge. For pride wounded by a daughter who had chosen the enemy. For a blood pact they now pretended had never existed. Menmaatre gathered his fighters, their blades glinting in the light, their eyes steeled for war. We'll hold the ridge, he said. If they pass, they'll raise the camp. We fight here. Layali stood beside him, her voice steady. I'll come with you. He shook his head. No. But she was already wrapping cloth around her hands, picking up a spear with trembling fingers. You taught me, she said. Now trust me. When the Wasit soldiers appeared, they were many, too many. Banners fluttered, horses stamped the earth, and at their head rode Nekau himself, face carved from stone. Move aside, he commanded. You harbor my blood, my shame. I will have her, or I will have her bones. Layali stepped forward, alone, between the two forces. You already buried me once, father, she called. You traded me like dates in the market. But I'm not yours. I'm not dead, and I'm not leaving. Arrows were knocked. Tension snapped in the air. Then Nekau did the one thing no one expected. He laughed, bitter, hollow. You sound just like your mother, he said, then turned his horse. Let the desert have you both. His army followed. No blood spilled, no war ignited. Only sand stirred in their wake. Layali fell to her knees, not from fear, but from the weight lifted off her chest. Menmaatre caught her in his arms, not as a protector, not as a debtor, but as a man in awe of the fire he could never extinguish. The wind no longer howled with grief in the desert. It whispered instead, of a girl who was once traded like property, and of a man who thought himself incapable of love. Weeks passed since Nekau's retreat, but the tribe still spoke of the day Layali stood alone between spears. They no longer saw her as a token of peace or a burden of the past. She was something far rarer, a woman who had chosen her fate and changed theirs in doing so. Menmaatre, too, had changed. The limp remained, the scars, too, but something deeper had mended. He laughed more, walked taller, and when Layali entered a room, his eyes softened before his mouth even moved. They didn't marry in the old tribal way. There was no grand feast, no binding ceremony before elders. Instead, one evening as the stars bloomed above, Menmaatre took her hand beside the fire and whispered, You were never meant to be mine, but I've never been more grateful to be wrong. She leaned into him, her voice barely audible against his chest. You didn't choose me. I chose you. That makes all the difference. And it did. Together they became something new. Not heirs of feud, not ghosts of old pain, but builders of a quiet future. She taught the children of the tribe to write with a steady hand. He trained the next generation with gentler eyes. And in every corner of their camp there lived a legend, not of war or betrayal, but of two people who had every reason to remain broken, yet chose instead to become whole. Layali, once silenced and sold, had found a voice. Menmaatre, once hardened and hollow, had found a heart. She wasn't meant to be loved, but she was, entirely, fiercely, and forever.